What's up, everybody? Ben Rasa and Matt Gajewski here for betting you for Odd Chop or for college football in general. You know what? It's week 0. It is time to talk about real games with real lines. I'm not saying we didn't have fun breaking down all these conferences, giving you some win totals, giving you some previews, but I know I can speak for Matt when I say getting into the thick of the schedule, into the games, even if it's week 0, is better than anything we've been doing lately. We got 7 games for you, but first things first, I'm going to tell the people you were jetting around the country, watching fights, having a good time. You're back. You seem locked in. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. One of my favorite days of the year is Saturday, week 0. We get new college football games to finally talk about, kick off the season. Notre Dame's playing, so I'll be very excited to watch them. Hopefully they can get it done against Navy. But yeah, otherwise just good spirits all around, man. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, it was had the birthday. Appreciate everyone reaching out. It was my birthday yesterday, ready to rock.
Oh, happy birthday. I miss
Thank
it,
you.
man.
Oh, it's all you were please. Let's not get crazy. Everything is good. I along with you, I love week 0. You get to see new teams and new matchups, and we are ready to break them down. If you're just joining us for the first time, of course, we're going to build this up. Whether you're listening in podcast form, by the way, you can get this episode anywhere you get podcasts. Check that out. You can leave a review. It's a great thing if you're maybe getting some exercise, doing some things. Give us a listen. If not, you're on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I'm not going to waste any more time. We got games, and we're going to start in Ireland. Didn't think I'd be saying that, but it's true. Navy and Notre Dame. It's a big spread. So again, let me just pull this up as well. I get a little screen share for us in a second, but we're talking about a big time spread. It's upwards of 3 touchdowns with this squad. Obviously, these teams, are familiar with each other. We see it all the time. How do you want to start things with Navy, a 21-point underdog, a 50.5-point total against Notre Dame in Europe?
Yeah, an interesting game. We saw a ton of money come in on Navy right when this line came out. And then Notre Dame has had a lot of buyback, which is really interesting. It's basically to the point where it opened. Originally, it was Notre Dame minus 21.5. This got all the way down to 19. That's where I took Notre Dame. And honestly, I have no issues with the current number here. I'm a bit surprised that Navy is getting a lot of love. And I think people are just looking back on previous trends in triple option teams and actually failing to dive into Navy's roster and see who's on there. They have a new DC. It's going to be a PJ Volker. He basically coached linebackers before, so I'm not expecting too much different there. Offensively, they are making some changes. Grant Chestnut, the Kennesaw State OC, he runs a version of the triple option. He'll be taking over. Expect a little more passing from Navy. And by passing, I mean screens, short passes, extension of the run game, essentially. And I'm honestly not sure that that's a positive for this team. Not only is it a big change, but you don't really have a quarterback for this team, which I haven't heard anybody talking about. Ty Lavatai missed the spring with an ACL tear. Xavier Arline plays lacrosse, so he hasn't had time with this new offense. Gleaton had an academic issue, so he was away from the team in the summer. Their coach came out and said that Lavatai and Blake Horvath are going to split snaps against Notre Dame here. I don't see in any world where that could possibly be viewed as a positive. And then Navy, they returned 4 offensive linemen, which is great, but that unit wasn't very good to begin with. They were 43rd in run blocking, 124th in pass blocking, but there's only one guy on that offensive line that's above 280 pounds. That makes sense in, the AAC when you face other teams like, I don't know, Memphis. But this is Notre Dame. This is Notre Dame with one of the best defensive lines in the country that has an excellent edge rushing group that's going to take Ty Lavatai coming off the ACL, Blake Horvath, and put them into the dirt if they're passing more. I mean, this is really difficult for me to see Navy moving the ball, especially if they try to throw. And on the Notre Dame side, I don't really see any way that Notre Dame just doesn't run up this score. They're probably going to play a little slower with Gerard Parker, the former tight ends coach, taking over the offense. I don't really think that makes a difference. You have a huge upgrade in Sam Hartman. Audric Estime is back at running back. He's a massive back, too. He's going to just overpower this small Navy defensive line, which people say is their strength. I mean, I guess it's probably a strength in terms of what Navy has on the roster, a roster that's just basically full of weaknesses. I think receivers better. I don't know how it could be worse. You basically have 4 stars across the board that are projected to play here. Jaden Thomas, 4-star. Tobias Merriweather, 4-star. Deion Colsey, 4-star. That doesn't even get into their depth pieces they recruited this year. The only place on offense they're going to be worse is tight end without Mayer. Offensive line is probably the best in the country, if not the best. This is a top 5 unit. Defense doesn't lose a ton of production here. You lose 2 on the edge, 1 defensive tackle, 1 corner, and 1 safety. Only one of those guys was drafted. That was Isaiah Foskey. And you have really good players coming back at almost every position. Botello was awesome on a small sample. Jean-Baptiste comes in from Ohio State to fill the edge void. In the secondary, 4 guys back with experience. Thomas Harper comes in, Oklahoma State transfer. This team is awesome. I don't know how they just don't run up the score here on Navy, to be honest with you.
I mean, so a couple little things. Normally, Notre Dame and Navy play all the time. It's a game you see annually, but you don't see it at the beginning of the year. And when you're in the thick of it and you're playing tough teams and then you get Navy, it's always, I think, a little awkward. Like you get this triple option team that comes out of nowhere. You're not prepping for it. You're not seeing it. I think Navy's one of the teams that generally gets better as the season goes on. To get them in week 1, when I'm sure they're prepping for this, I think is a huge advantage for Notre Dame on top of just, obviously we know they have a talent disparity. We know that if Navy falls behind, they have to attempt to throw. None of that is going to work. But you've seen in recent years, I mean, last year was a real close game. Navy can keep it close. I just don't know if they keep it close right now to start the season in week 0 like this. You know, looking at the total, basically the implied, you know, you've got like 38-14. I mean, it's a little rough. It's a little less than that 37-15 type math. And that feels about right to me. I think if you can find, I'm not sure I would take it at 21 flat, just because even on the screen here on DraftKings, and we'll talk about a bunch of books today, it's taking pressure at 21. At 20.5, I think you'll be able to find that inside 3 touchdowns. You have it inside 3 touchdowns. It feels like a Notre Dame inside 3 touchdowns or pass for me.
Yeah, I think if you're going to go beyond that 21, I would probably just play an alternate spread if it's available to you. And I understand your point on Navy, and I understand everyone's point, honestly. Like this series has been played close historically. What I don't agree with is people just blindly using that logic and not actually looking into the roster. Like this isn't the Navy team that had Malcolm Perry. And even last year's team, I mean, like in that game they played, you have somewhat competent quarterback play. You have, I guess, Xavier Arline played in that game. Masai Maynard, like those guys aren't there. So plus that's a Drew Pine game for Notre Dame. I mean, there's a lot of different elements to this matchup compared to last year's matchup and previous matchups before that.
Certainly, like I said, when we're early in the year, there's going to be some lopsided spreads, but there's also a lot of competitive spreads. And honestly, I was pretty excited when I looked at what we got for week 0. Now I just switched to Caesars because they have this game listed and DraftKings doesn't. I'll talk about, there's a really cool deal with Caesars that we're going to get to in just a little bit. But this is, now we're getting to my territory. Give me all the UTEP and Jacksonville State. You may have to go into the deep web to find this game. Maybe it's on TV. I have actually no idea. It's a straight pick 'em. Jacksonville State is a new team, over under a 53. I have bet the over on UTEP's win total this year. This is a team that I think actually returns a lot of production and is going to be pretty good. The question I have for you, in their opening game, do you lean to the Miners or do you lean to the Gamecocks?
I do lean to the Miners. I bet this when it was at a pick'em, and I agree with you. I think this is the better team here, and I think this is another spot where people are just blindly using logic and seeing teams make the jump from FCS to FBS. And historically, those teams have done pretty well. We're talking about minuscule samples. I mean, like App State did it. We just saw James Madison do it last year, and those teams have been pretty good here. And people are just blindly assuming that Jacksonville State can do the same thing. I think they'll be good, but they're actually running into a decent team here. In UTEP, who returns a lot, they do have a new OC. There still should be continuity here. He's the wide receivers coach from last year. And this team was 41st on offense. They had a good offensive line. We can get into all that. But first things first, they have a returning signal caller in Gavin Hardison. Took a little bit of a step back last year, but this is a kid that's played well, and he has most of his receivers back. Seeing Tyron Smith enter the portal, go to Texas A&M, re-enter the portal, and come back to UTEP was huge for him and this offense. So receiving weapons should be pretty good here. Kelly Akari's back. Jeremiah Ballard's back. They only really lose Ronaldo Flores among the pass catchers. Run game is good here too. Deion Hankins was 14th in the conference in terms of efficiency on the ground. Also add a Sam Houston running back there. So you're deep in the running back room. From there, you only lose one offensive lineman, and the guys you return are pretty good here. Not to mention, you had Zuri Henry get injured. He's coming back, only played in 2 games before the injury. He has nearly 2,000 career snaps on the offensive line. This unit's going to be awesome, and it's going to be overpowering. I think the biggest concern here for UTEP is going to be on defense, but I think they have pretty good players across the board here, especially in their front 7. It's really their secondary that is troublesome to me. And fortunately, their opponent, Jacksonville State, has one of the highest run rates in the entire country. Now, you got to go all the way deep into the FCS ranks to find this, but this is a glorified triple option team at some points. We're talking about like 70% run rates here. They don't have a clear starter at quarterback. I don't love that. They have 7-year player Zion Webb. He's battling Smothers, who's failed at every point in the FBS level. You do get both your runners back, which is solid. Lead rusher Anwar Lewis. They added Malik Jackson from Louisiana Monroe. Your receivers are back for the most part. They don't throw the ball anyway, so that's not really too concerning for me. Positive or negative, I guess, for either side. Offensive line does have 4 guys back. That's solid here too. But again, they're facing the tougher part of UTEP's defense, that front 7. That is the toughest part of that team on defense by far. And meanwhile, on defense for Jacksonville State, they're facing a huge jump in competition. I think their biggest question is going to be their secondary, where they're replacing a few starters. And UTEP is pretty balanced with Tyron Smith coming back, Hardison. They can throw. They have an explosive offense, and they can run the ball with Hankins and some of the additions they made, plus that solid offensive line. So I'm a bit surprised here to see this as close as it is. Not to mention, we had a very small sample of Jacksonville State jumping off to FBS for a game last year, and they got blown out by Tulsa 54-17. Tulsa finished 5-7 and didn't exactly have a great year. Jacksonville State was 9-2 in the FCS. That's awesome, but man, we've got little data points here that have me pretty worried for Jacksonville State in this game.
37-point beatdown against Tulsa. I think UTEP is closer to Tulsa than an FCS team by a long stretch. And I know, listen, that was last year, but you already drilled down on the point that I want to make is one of the bigger things when you make the jump is the lines, the fronts. And UTEP, even for this conference, not just for this game, has what I view as one of the better offensive lines that Jacksonville State is going to see. This team is going to get mauled up front. And if they get mauled up front and like Navy and they fall behind, good luck. Because stylistically, first thing I saw with this matchup is if Jacksonville State can't just run it and control clock and do what they do, UTEP is way more balanced. They've got an experienced quarterback. I've always been a fan of him. I know he took a step back last year, but I think UTEP is just the better team here. I'm really surprised that this is at Pick'em. I think the total's about right. If I had to bet the total, I would bet over. But my favorite bet in this game is just taking UTEP to straight win the game at Pick'em.
I 100% agree. UTEP, Pick'em, I think -1 is 5. You could have got this at the dog price. I missed that number, unfortunately.
So did I.
But, I mean, money line stuff, I'm completely fine with all that.
Okay, 2 down. We got plenty more for you, but it's no better time because I actually found this line on Caesars. If you do not play at Caesars, you've probably seen some buzz about this. And we're not surprised, I'll be honest. With football coming around, the books are starting to make some moves to vie for your business, and Caesars has done just that. They have an offer right now for new users. It's in the link in the description of this video. You deposit on Caesars. It takes a couple minutes. You take $50 and you put it on a bet. I'd say put it on UTEP. That would be my advice. But win or lose, you are going to get 5 $50 free bets once a week. It's going to total $250 in bonus bets from Caesars. That is going to give you a huge boost for football season once a week. I really, really think this is a cool way to do it. You're getting that boost every single week, $50, 5 straight weeks. You got to be 21 plus. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. But shout out to Caesars. If you are thinking about betting college football or the NFL, there's no reason not to add Caesars to the Rolodex and get those $250 in bonus bets. Now, if I didn't make the schedule, don't blame me. UMass just, they want to put all the elite teams on week 0. So we have to talk about them. I don't make the rules. How about this UMass team? But yeah, you know what? I was going to talk about Ohio, but no, we're going to UMass. I'm staying here. I want to talk about UMass. 6.5-point underdog. They're taking money. They are taking some money. This has crossed 7. They take on the vaunted New Mexico State squad. My God, I can't wait to hear you break down this game. A total of 45. Can UMass compete? They lost some transfers. They actually had a couple good players. Now they're gone. What am I looking at with my squad?
They also have a couple good players coming in. I think the easiest analysis you could possibly make, which we're going to go deeper than this, is that both these teams stink, and neither team should be favored by a touchdown when they're playing another team that's basically their equal. Anyway, to actually get into this, you've got year 2 of Don Brown for UMass. I'll start with this team. They went 1-11 last year. There wasn't really anything fishy on the record. But Don Brown, man, he has been recruiting the rest of the country primarily in the transfer portal and getting a ton of Power 5 guys. Go ahead and look at this roster. You're going to see Arizona littered everywhere. But this starts with quarterback. They have Tyson Fomashawn. He's played at Georgia Tech and Clemson, a former 4-star. Even though he hasn't been able to see the field, some because he was parked behind elite signal colors at Clemson, some due to injury at Georgia Tech. This is an enormous upgrade on anyone who's taken a snap under center for UMass in recent memory. This is a 4-star recruit. When's the last time UMass had a 4-star recruit at quarterback? I don't know that it's ever happened before.
Nope. Me.
And he is dual threat, which is awesome when you're playing other weak teams. You don't necessarily need to rely on the arm. Love that. They have 2 of their top 4 backs back returning this year, plus a ton of transfers. K'Ron Adams, former Syracuse runner. Greg DeRosier, he was there last year. You have Jalen John, comes over from Arizona. Jackson Paradis from Buffalo. A lot of good players here in this running back room. Wide receiver, you return George Johnson. He's a former Michigan player. You do lose Cam Sullivan-Brown and Isaac Ross, but you add Mark Pope from Jackson State. He was formerly with Miami. You had Anthony Simpson from Arizona, and you had Christian Wells from App State. This is quietly a pretty good receiving group here. Offensive line loses just 1 player. Even with that said, it's probably the biggest concern on the unit. None of these guys were very good, so you are going to need to rely on a step forward here. They do have some transfers, and like Marcellus Anderson comes over from Saginaw Valley State. He was first team all-conference at a lower level of competition. So I think you're kind of just spraying and praying, taking your 5 returners, they did have some injuries, taking your 4 transfers and hoping you can piece together a better offensive line. They were 46th in pass blocking, only 123rd in run blocking. So I think they'll probably meet somewhere in the middle, right around the top 100, which should be an improvement here. Defense, they portaled a ton of guys. This is unbelievable how many guys they portaled in. They have a couple guys on the edge over 200 snaps, 2 guys in the interior over 300, some former 4-stars coming in on the interior, linebackers, complete portal job. I mean, it's tough to analyze each of these players individually, but when you look at the grand scheme of things, UMass is going out. They're hitting the transfer portal and hitting a lot of Power 5 schools, and they're taking players and just spraying and praying with a bunch of them, hoping some of them work out, like Chambray Jackson with Florida State, former 4-star, top 300 player. Deshaun Jenkins with Ole Miss, former borderline 4-star prospect. You're seeing former starters like Jerry Roberts come over from Arizona. Wasn't great there, but the step down in competition should be huge here. Then on the other side, this New Mexico State team absolutely stinks. Second year, Jerry Kill. I mean, they made a bowl game by the grace of God, and they had 2 FCS teams on the schedule last year, so some weird stuff had to happen for them to get there. I think the best thing you can say here with this team is you return your signal caller, you return 5 of your top 6 receivers. I think that's solid. The offensive line here is atrocious. You lose 2 players there, and they were your top 2 players. I think this offensive line is worse than UMass's at this point, given who you lost and who you returned. Like Kanan Yarrow, AJ Valpulu, and Shiaz Pete are all horrible. Do have some transfers, so maybe they fill the gaps there. But then, man, you look to defense. This defense lost a ton of guys. You lost your top 5 guys in terms of snaps. All of them were pretty good. Everyone you're returning is awful, and the overall talent level is really low here. When New Mexico State hits the portal, they're generally taking JUCO guys. So, man, I mean, this is pretty brutal here. Their secondary only has 3 players above 300 snaps. They have nobody above 500, so you're completely inexperienced there. Linebacker doesn't have anyone over 284 snaps. Defensive line doesn't have anyone close to 400. The Edge doesn't even have anyone over 250. I mean, this unit might be worse than the top 100, which is right around where they were last year. They were exactly 100th. With their departures, I don't know how they stopped the run or the pass this year. And fortunately, UMass might not even need to pass. They can just fall back on that dual threat ability. I took UMass plus 7.5. 6.5 is a little iffy here. I might just play them on the money line at that number. But man, I think these teams are a lot closer to a pick 'em than what the books are indicating.
Totally. I mean, all biases aside, I really, if you're going to tell me I can get 2-1 on either of these teams, I would gladly take it because they just shouldn't be that big of an underdog. And New Mexico State, first of all, not that this is the end all be all, but New Mexico State last year won 5 games. Very, very impressive for that team, but you're not going to get to a bowl with 5 games. So what did they do? They found a team that I legitimately don't know. Maybe it's the Bryce Drew Valparaiso, or it might just be another school named Valparaiso who I didn't know played football. And they won 65-3 in week 14. And that is why they got into a bowl. They literally found a made up school to play. They also played Lamar. They made some strides. They beat UMass last year. The sheer volume of transfers, even if half of them don't work out, the infusion of talent for a team like UMass is exponentially different when you're talking about this level of competition. So I just look at this squad. I have no idea how UMass is going to be, but I think talent-wise, and I don't know the last time I've said this, I think talent-wise, UMass has more talent than New Mexico State.
I agree with you. You could just go down and look at the 4. UMass has 4 stars on their roster now. Sure, A lot of them failed at Florida State, Clemson, Michigan, wherever it may be, but still, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's hard to play at those schools. Going to UMass, they should be able to shine.
Anything on the thoughts on this total? Again, to me, it feels about right. You could see a pretty sluggish game. Pace, I don't expect to be up. UMass allowed 6 yards per play. I think they'll be better than that this year. Anything there with a 45-point total?
Yeah, totals are a little funky this time of year. I haven't played a ton of totals in this week 0 with the new clock rules. Unless something really, really stands out, I'm probably going to play mostly spreads for a little bit here. Both these teams are awful. If I were looking at anything, it would probably be the over on this, but a couple slow run-heavy teams, you could see a lot of volatility here, but I think the strength of both teams are on offense.
UMass plus 210. Again, shop at oddshopper.com. If you can find 7 or better, I don't mind that. 210 is good enough for me. There's going to be a lot of dogs for me in week 0, as you can see, and there's going to be another one here as we go, and I'm kind of shopping this on the fly just to see which book has the better line for my team. And then my team here would be the Ohio Bobcats at plus 2.5. Another weird game against San Diego State, a team I shorted a ton last year, a 49-point total. Talk to me about this. You got the MAC a little bit in here. Do you think Ohio's a live team? Obviously a competitive spread. That's where I'm leaning. Are you on either of these squads?
I'm right there with you in Ohio. Kind of regret the way I played this. With Curtis Rourke coming off the ACL, he's the MAC Player of the Year last year, the star quarterback for Ohio. I was worried about his health, and I thought, all right, I'm just going to have my Twitter notifications on. I'm going to hit this immediately if we get positive news. And of course, I was out doing something when the news came in. So it immediately goes past 3, 2.5, yeah, which is where I grabbed it, which is fine, I think. Honestly, that was probably dumb because they have a capable backup. I should have just taken that when it was at 4.5. Anyway, to dive into the rosters, you have the MAC Player of the Year under center. I think the only concern here is is that mobility compromised? His ACL tear was in November, so he's about 9 months removed from that. Awesome that he's back, but is he still capable of running the ball? I don't really know if it matters in a matchup like this. We'll get into San Diego State, but you have your top rusher back, say Bangura. You also return O'Shane Allison. He was injured last year. Previously a strong contributor to that run game before. 3 of your top 4 receivers are back, highlighted by Sam Wigletts, former Ohio State guy. Had an absolutely awesome year last year. Both tight ends are back. You return 4 starters in the offensive line. Your best player is gone, Hagen Miservi, so this is probably your biggest concern. But overall, this was a pretty young group last year. I think they do take a step forward. And last year, they were 100th in pass blocking, 52nd in run blocking. They should be better than that this year. Aside from the offensive line, the defense was probably the biggest concern. They'll be comprised of some transfers here. You've got one starter on the edge returning, one on the defensive line. I still think that unit's pretty good. They were in the top 100 in both run defense and pass rush. And it's a MAC school. Like, you're never going to see these teams approach the top 30. So generally speaking, top 100 unit is pretty good for a MAC school. Their secondary was the biggest concern last year, but they're now returning 4 corners and bowl safeties, plus they add 2 transfers. I do think that unit's probably going to be a little bit better this year. And fortunately for them, they don't have to defend the pass in this week 0 game because San Diego State does not throw the ball. Part of the reason is they have a converted safety playing quarterback, and he was actually pretty good. So I got to give him his flowers a little bit. He was the 6th highest graded passer in the Mountain West. There's a lot more than 6 teams, so you can do the little math here. He was better than a lot of guys out there, and he was the 3rd highest overall graded quarterback. A lot of that due to his rushing. That was Pro Football Focus. Running back, you should be pretty strong here. You lose 2 of your top 4 guys. Receivers, a huge weakness. They lost Tyrell Shavers and Jesse Matthews. Both of those guys have been in training camp in the NFL. Mekhi Shaw is your best returning receiver, so huge downgrade there. You do have your tight end back. Offensive line loses 2 starters, and you lost a tackle to Ohio State. That's a huge concern. I didn't think he was very good, but I mean, Ohio State came and plucked him. So he's probably a little better than what I think. And then on defense, lose 2 edges, lose 2 defensive tackles, 2 linebackers, and 2 safeties. They usually play with 3 safeties and 2 corners here. That's fine. But this is an Ohio team on the other side that can run and pass. Like, I would be afraid of Bangura and Allison as a the running back tandem, and Rourke if he's healthy too. They can run against you in multiple ways. And then if you start loading the box or whatever changes they might make to their personnel, they go 3 deep at wide receiver and they have both their tight ends back. There's a lot of ways they can beat San Diego State, who is a completely one-dimensional team on offense with a much, much weaker defense than we saw in previous years. And I think this defense is only getting weaker. This is previously like the best defense in the conference. Last year, they jumped to 32nd, and they already started to show cracks. And a lot of that came in the front 7. Their run defense was 68th. I think other teams are going to be able to run on them again this year, seeing as they lost a lot of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, San Diego State was a team that I was looking to short at times last year, and I'll be honest, I was actually pretty unsuccessful doing it, partly because safety turned out to be better at quarterback than I anticipated, but got some film on him, got some tape on him. I also think that Ohio is one of, I don't think this is outrageous to say, they might be one of the better MAC teams this year. When you look at them, you mentioned the quarterback, plus 2.5, you have plus 114 out there. I know it's not a massive change, but stuff like that adds up. I think that's all in range. This is one, again, I did not bet this. I want to be clear, but of the games we've talked about so far, I think the total in this game going under would maybe be my favorite total so far. I still respect the defenses here. I think there could be some real bad offense from San Diego State in particular. This game screams to me like, a 28-17, even maybe at the ceiling for Ohio, I hope.
Yeah, to speak on the total, I'm in agreement with you. It's already come down a 0.5 point. Yeah. Not crazy, but it is the under that's taking money. You have the one-dimensional offense for San Diego State going up against an improved Ohio defense. And then for all the weaknesses I think San Diego State has up front, they do have a good secondary. They were 23rd in coverage last year. They still have 2 of those corners back, 1 safety. So you've got 3 of your 5 returning. That's a pretty good unit. And if Ohio does decide to take a ground and pound approach, that should help you clockwise too in this spot. So yeah, I didn't bet that. I did bet Ohio plus 2.5. I think I bet every game so far that we've talked about. So hopefully,
yeah, for only 7 games, I have a good amount of bets.
Yeah, same
on week 0. And when I think of week 0 from last year, when I think of early season college football, the game that I think about truly is Hawaii and Vanderbilt. It was one of my favorite bets of the year last year. I was positive that Vanderbilt was going to roll them, and I turned on the TV, and Hawaii and their new offense marched down the field in about 10 seconds and scored. And I thought I made a big mistake. And then Vanderbilt legitimately scored 60 points in a row. And that was in Hawaii. Now they've got to go to Tennessee, to Vanderbilt, whatever city that is. I don't know where Vanderbilt is. Knoxville, Memphis.
Isn't it Nashville?
Nashville. Nashville. We're going with Nashville. If here it's a nice school. I've never been there.
Well, they don't have
17
a stadium right now.
Yeah, well, you know what? They'll play wherever they need to play. 17 and a half, taking a little money. This has bounced around a little bit. Let me check Caesars, 17 and a half. So no surprises. Big talent disparity. We talked about Vanderbilt in the SEC preview. Obviously, when you play the East and some of the teams in the West, different level of competition than playing a team like Hawaii. 55 and a half point total. How lopsided does this one get?
I think very lopsided. I don't know what Hawaii did to improve this year. And I think Vanderbilt's a slightly better team overall. And that probably doesn't even appear in their win-loss record just because of the gauntlet they have to run in the SEC. But, I mean, we saw what I think is a weaker Vanderbilt team beat up on essentially the same Hawaii team, and they absolutely destroyed them. I think it's the same here. I don't know what the home field is going to be like with Vanderbilt unable to complete their stadium in time, but I mean, you'd still think there is some with Hawaii coming across, half the world. It's still closer to Vanderbilt's home. But to dive into Hawaii's roster first, you do return Braden Schrager at quarterback. He was 7th in the Mountain West in just pure passing per Pro Football Focus. I think he's pretty erratic. He had 13 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He cannot run whatsoever. You do lose your top rusher in Dedrick Parsons. I like Talon Hines behind him. We'll see if he can actually take the step forward. Was really efficient, averaged 7.5 yards per carry on a small sample. So they are still going to need a step forward from him. Their receiving room is really weird. They lost a bunch of guys, Zion Bowens, Caleb Phillips, Dior Scott, James Phillips, but the team had like a million injuries at receiver last year. They completely shook up their depth chart. So I do my depth chart projections ahead of the year. And then I saw the depth chart they put out and I was completely shocked. Like, I thought their top 2 receivers were going to be Jonah Panoke and Jalen Walthall. Panoke was listed as a starter, but they put Walthall as a third stringer. They do have Stephen McBride coming in as a transfer listed as a starter, but Pofeli Ashlock was listed as the third starter. I don't even know who that is, which is saying a lot. So before the DFS previews later in the week, I'm going to have to do my research on this guy. But right away, depth chart is pretty concerning to me because your best contributors are listed as third stringers. I don't understand that. Regardless, you then lose 4 of your offensive linemen. You do grab some transfers here, like Josh Atkins comes in from Houston. He never started. And that unit was really hurt as well last year. So you do have a couple guys that played. And then on defense, man, like this unit was absolutely horrific. You lose a linebacker, 2 corners, a safety, and a defensive tackle. Most of your defensive line is back, but I mean, you were 124th in run defense, 114th in pass rush. Vanderbilt ran all over you last year. They return a lot of talent, but I mean, just overall, this team was 123rd total defense. With a lot of the same players coming back, how high can they possibly rise just year over year? Learning experience. I would be shocked if they even got a single one of those key metrics in the top 100. Then for Vandy, you've got 2 signal callers back with experience. I like AJ Swan. He's not mobile, but he's a good facilitator. You do lose Ray Davis. That's a big loss. Goes over to Kentucky. But Patrick Smith, Chase Gillespie. Plus, you got like a borderline 4-star running back recruit in Cedric Alexander, who's getting a ton of hype. I think they probably started in a committee, but Alexander gives you some upside. Your top 3 receivers are back. These are good receivers in this conference, solid yards per route run. You returned 5 starters on the offensive line. Unit wasn't great by SEC standards, but they should be far and away better than Hawaii's offensive line here, and especially run all over that defensive line. Vanderbilt's defense was a weakness last year, but again, I think this is probably a spot where they can just rely on their SEC depth and completely overpower this Hawaii team. Your front 7, I think, is going to be pretty good here. You had some transfers up there. One of your edges is back. It should be a pretty good defense overall when you dive into the non-con here. When you look at Vanderbilt overall, I think people just view them as one of the worst teams in the country. This team is 52nd in recruiting. Like, they get 4 stars every year. This team, maybe they're the worst in the SEC, but when you put them up against the other worst teams in the country, like the worst team in the Mountain West, which is Hawaii, this team should win by like 35 points.
If Vanderbilt was in the Mountain West, they would go to a bowl every year.
Without a doubt, they'd win it.
Yeah. Like, the team beat Hawaii by 50 plus points on the road last year. Now, again, things can change, but I'm looking at Hawaii's results from last year. They lost by 53 to Vanderbilt. They lost by 32 to Western Kentucky. They lost by 46 to Michigan. Okay, that's fine. They lost by 19 points to New Mexico State. That might be worse than anything I already said. Then they got into the thick of the Mountain West, and they really were just fine. They lost most of their games in a standard fashion, except to Fresno by 42. Anytime they play even a remotely competent offense, they are gashed for 40 or 50 points. And even in this game, I feel like Vanderbilt is live for 45 esque points. That means that you're asking Hawaii to score 4 touchdowns to keep it within pace, and it would lean to the over. But I don't see it with Hawaii. I'm going to need to see big changes. That team was a mess. 2 years ago, they had a mass exodus because of the, not scandal, but obviously there was a lot of turmoil in that coaching staff. I don't think they've recovered from that. And I actually think Vanderbilt is on the upswing. I prefer it under 17. I couldn't find that. I don't think it's going to get there. I would take it here. Anything inside like 20, I think is good.
I 100% agree. And like Hawaii tried to rebuild their defense a little bit. I didn't dive into like their transfers, but I hate these transfers. I think they only got one good player in Cam Stone from Wyoming. The rest of them are like guys that couldn't play at UTEP, couldn't play at UNLV, couldn't play at Cal. They do have one starter from Eastern Washington, but that's a guy making the jump from FCS to FBS now facing Vandy, who has a good offensive line and a good rushing attack. Like, I hate this defense. So, yeah, alt lines, if you want to get crazy, find some plus money out there. I think they're in play.
Yep. And that's the difference. Last thing I'll say, you mentioned a bunch of transfers at UMass. The difference when you're transferring out of Clemson and Bama and like, okay, you went to an elite program and maybe it didn't work out. When you're transferring out of Nevada and UNLV, it's not the same. It's not the same level of drop off. It's kind of a parallel move, and I'm not super high on that kind of concept. If you bring in those guys, not saying it can't work, but I'm kind of saying it can't work. All right, 2 games left. Now we're getting real crazy. San Jose State has volunteered to just get absolutely destroyed. 30.5 point underdog, 66.5 point total. Caleb Williams and co. It's not a matter of who wins the game. It's by a matter of how much does USC want to show in a week 0 game against an opponent like this. Anything here, to me, this is the worst game on the entire slate.
I 100% agree. It is the only one I haven't bet so far. Actually, it's the only one so far I haven't bet. We'll talk about the last game, but that's a crazy game here as well. What it comes down to is exactly what you said. USC can name their score if they want to, but San Jose State has a competent offense. If they take their foot off the gas, USC that is, put in backups, just start playing vanilla off coverage. Like, San Jose State has the players that could backdoor this, which has me pretty concerned. Maybe if it goes through like 31, I'll consider playing San Jose State, but right now it's pretty difficult for me. When you look at their roster, Cordero's back. He's solid, former Hawaii signal caller, 3rd highest graded signal caller overall in the Mountain West. He's one of the reasons I think they could maybe backdoor this. Starting running back is back, Kyrie Robinson. He's solid, 2nd highest graded rusher in the conference. I love Cordero, but his receivers are awful. You lose 3 of your top 4 guys, and you lose Elijah Cooks. He's in NFL camp right now. I think Justin Lockhart's fine, and they do have Nick Nash. He was a former quarterback who moved over to receiver. Another year should help him. Your offensive line loses 1 starter. That unit, I don't think, was really a strength or a weakness last year. They were really injured, so I think some of their negative plays were just a result of that. They were outside the top 100 in run blocking specifically, but really, really banged up unit. Hopefully with better health, they'll be improved there. Defense lost a ton, especially up front. You lose most of your defensive line. You only have 1 starter returning there. That's not good against USC. They can run and pass on you. When San Jose State plays teams in the Mountain West, I think their secondary is going to hold up. I'm still concerned about their D-line, but I think USC can really do whatever they want against this team. And to dive into USC briefly, I don't think we need to spend a ton of time. Heisman winners back, Caleb Williams. You lose Travis Dye at running back, but Austin Jones returns. You get Marshawn Lloyd. He was awesome in the SEC. You lose Jordan Addison, but you replace him with Dorian Singer. He was a top 2 receiver yard-wise in the conference last year. Also Taj Washington, Mario Williams, Brennan Rice back. Really good unit. Offensive line portaled some guys to replace, Brett Nylon, Bobby Haskins, Andrew Voorhees. So they have 2 returning starters back with Monheim and Diedich. Mason Murphy played a fair amount too, but you get Michael Tarkine from Florida, Jarrett Kingston from Washington State, Emmanuel Pregnon from Wyoming. Those are all starters with grades above 70 at Pro Football Focus, so good to elite players. Defense should be better here. You don't lose a ton of guys. The only guys drafted were Mekhi Blackman and Tuli Tuipulotu. I think the transfers are solid here. Mason Cobb at linebacker. He should be an improvement on, Eric Gentry, Shane Lee. I think one of them probably has to start. Defense, you got 4 corners back with experience. You add Christian Roland Wallace. The defense, I think, gets to the top, inside the top 50 this year. And last year they were 51st, which I think is probably better than some people thought. You hear people talk about USC, you'd think they had like Vanderbilt's defense or Hawaii's defense. This was the 51st best defense in the country. They do need a step if they're going to, challenge for a title or something, but they should absolutely roll San Jose State to whatever score they want, which currently has me away from this game. Thought about an over. I should have taken it at 63. It's taken a ton of money. It's up to 66.5. You might be able to find lower if you shop this, but USC should put up as many points as they want. And then if they take their foot off the gas, I think San Jose can score on a second team defense or just a defense not trying anymore.
Yeah, it's tough because like you said, they could be up by 38 and give up a couple quick score. Like there's just so many ways that it lands around that. There is I just pulled up Caesars. There's a 31 flat out there. If you're looking for San Jose State side, I would probably go there. 6.5 is basically unanimous. I just don't see much. I'd say one benefit if you want to lay the points is that USC doesn't have a massive game in week 1 where they're going to be they don't play anyone competent for a month. So they're not going to be too worried about not showing a ton, but at the same time, I don't really see it. And then for San Jose State, I'll say this, they didn't play these type of teams. They played Auburn, who's not USC. They really didn't get blown out of any game last year. They were very competitive in all their games. I like Cordero. You mentioned the former Hawaii player there. How the hell am I going to back this team? USC could end up scoring 55 points on their own, and that wouldn't shock me. Maybe a live play or something if USC starts slow, because they can turn it on very quickly. But I think this is a game that's a pretty easy pass for me.
Yep, it's my least favorite on the board.
Now, this might be the craziest game, and we got this game left to round it out. But I do want to say a couple quick things. One, of course, you're going to be seeing a ton of college football content here at Odd Chopper. Matt will have videos. I'm going to have a parlay video. We're going to be doing all sorts of things. And here at Betting You, where we give you a full breakdown. Make sure you take advantage of everything in the link in the description, including Caesars. I'm telling you, $50 is going to get you 5 $50 free bets, bonus bets. A really good opportunity to take advantage of that if you're trying to build a bankroll. I don't know about this game. This is random and this is wild. FIU. Louisiana Tech is a team that I legitimately forget exists. I don't know why. There's something about them. An 11-point spread, a 58.5 point total. This is all you. I have no idea where you're going in this game. What do you see when you look at these two teams?
I so badly wanted to bet FIU in this spot, and I don't think I can. Catching 11 points, 58.5 total. I like FIU. Let me qualify that a little bit. I like FIU compared to them last year and against other bad teams. I think both these teams are going to struggle a little bit this year. But for FIU specifically, they beat Louisiana Tech last year. They got the same coaching staff. You have the same quarterback. You can't say that about a lot of teams where you have head coach, OC, quarterback all intact, but they do. You can still raise questions about how talented Grayson James actually is. I certainly have them. He does run a little bit, which is solid. You lose your top 2 backs. Keyshawn Owens returns, but then you go to South Dakota, get a transfer in Shamari Lawrence. At receiver, you lost your best player in Tyrese Chambers. I think Chris Mitchell, Bracey, and Dean Patterson are a downgrade here. All those guys were outside the top 35 in yards per route run in the conference. You lost your tight end. You lost 3 starters in the offensive line, which was a group that was really, really young last year. They were basically starting a bunch of freshmen. You do add some transfers. I think the offensive line is probably going to be atrocious again this year. This team does throw a lot. They play with a pretty decent pace. So maybe they could score on teams, we'll get to that later. I think that's probably where I'm going to lean if I do end up betting this game. But man, a lot of things to completely dislike about this team. I think they'll be better on defense. Their pass rush is actually pretty good here. They only lose 1 contributor on the defensive line. D tackle. I guess they do lose one edge too here. More of a linebacker hybrid, but this coverage unit should be pretty good here. Overall, this team plays decent defense, which you might not think. They were 65th in overall defense, 29th in pass rush, 84th in coverage, and they got a lot of guys coming back. So if they do win, I think it's probably just gross, volatile games. On the Louisiana Tech side, second year of the Cumbie regime. I think he's a pretty fun coach overall. I'm still kind of debating what their goal is and what they're trying to be. They bring in Hank Bachmeier, former Boise State signal caller. He's definitely had his ups and downs in college. He can't run, pure pocket passer. Their running back is hurt, Marquise Crosby. So you're going to go to Jarvis Thornton, who is really good on a small sample, but small samples are tough to trust. Receiver, you've got 3 of your top 4 receivers back. Trey Harris is the only one who leaves. They do have some pretty interesting names in like the transfer portal. Dakotas Crawford, former 4-stars there, but he wasn't listed on the depth chart, so I don't even know if he plays. Anyway, they have enough returning production from last year where I think they'll be fine. Offensive line lost 2 starters. They were 2 of your better players, which is kind of tough. Fortunately, Abraham, Delphin returns from injury. He didn't play much last year. Starter in 2021. So you've got about 4 guys with returning starting experience. The defense will be a concern. Only 5 players returned with starting experience. They rated the portal, basically just taking FCS guys, and they have like 6 guys from Stephen F. Austin, interestingly enough. That team was pretty good on defense, so maybe they can improve. I'm still a little curious about the jump from Stephen F. Austin to Louisiana Tech. But yeah, man, really volatile game. Basically, to sum it all up, I think this Louisiana Tech offense is going to score, even against the strength of FIU's team, which is their defense. And then on the other side, like Louisiana Tech's weakness is going to be defense. That's what FIU struggles with too. So it's kind of like, all right, strength on strength, weakness on weakness, what actually wins out here, which makes it pretty difficult to handicap, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a weird game. Louisiana Tech, they must have some type of coaching connect. They played Stephen F. Austin last year, which is kind of weird in itself. And it was
Must
one
have
of
liked them. They took a bunch of their players.
Yeah, I mean, they only had a couple wins last year. They beat Stephen F. Austin. They beat UTEP. They beat Middle Tennessee. They lost. I mean, they got blown out by a bunch of schools. I'm not sure about this team. Maybe this kind of, the more I look at this is almost creeping into the territory of UMass, New Mexico State, where I just don't think Louisiana Tech should be double-digit favorites against anyone in the country. Like, I'm just not sure that I can lay those type of points. But you mentioned, what they're trying to do in terms of a dynamic offense, maybe. Then FIU, I thought they were the worst team in the country through a couple weeks. They beat Bryant by 1 point to start the season. They were getting destroyed. Then they started to rally a little bit. Maybe they're not that bad. Obviously, they've got really good recruiting ground in the heart of Miami, but I guess it would be take the points or pass, take the over or pass. I lean FIU in the over, but I'm not sure that I have not bet this personally.
I lean FIU and the over as well. Have not bet either side. I do not know that I will.
Yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing, this is the 9:00 Eastern game. If like UMass wins or something, I may, you can check that out in Discord. You find me on Twitter at JazzRazDFS, Matt at Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Maybe we'll have a late night play on this game, but I think this is towards the bottom of the best games of the week. So we've gone through 7 games. We've given some plays. And again, you're going to have a nice video out talking about these, but if on the way out, just a couple of words. If you had, say you did the Caesars promo and you got your first free bet coming up, if you're going to take a game or 2, where would you put your money for week 0?
I like a couple dogs, but I would honestly go with the favorites here. I don't think they're being appropriately priced. And my 2 favorites are Notre Dame against Navy. Quickly, Notre Dame, they'll have massive advantages in the trenches. I'm not worried about their new OC and new quarterback in week 1. Navy doesn't have, only has 1 offensive lineman above 280 pounds. They should be able to dominate this triple option attack, which is undergoing some changes, by the way. Plus, their 2 quarterbacks missed spring. This should be a Notre Dame unit that's prepared, whereas Navy, I'm not sure, has had that same prep time, given Labatai's ACL, Arlene playing lacrosse, and Gleaton's academic issues. The other one is Vandy. Cannot believe this is only 17.5. Don't love the hook, but honestly, I'm okay with it, and I'm open to some alternate lines here. Vandy's a team that recruits at about a top 50 unit in the country. Hawaii's outside the top 100. Hawaii's essentially trotting out the same unit, and honestly, they've taken a step back in some places. Whereas Vandy has a lot of good experience, quarterbacks returning. You have all three of your receivers. You only lost one offensive lineman, plus you get another from injury. So you have 5 guys with starting experience. They just run the ball down Hawaii's throat all game here, and I think they cover the spread as well.
It's hard to argue with either of those. If you want a live dog, it's, again, not a major upset. I think Ohio should be slight favorites, not slight dogs. They're a quality team, got some good personnel, and I don't trust San Diego State in that game, second game on the schedule. But there you have it again. Just a little appetizer. Week 1's got like 75 games, and we'll be ready. That's what we do. And certainly, as I said already, you have any questions, at JazzRazDFS, at Matt_Gajewski. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, whether you're listening on podcast, watching on YouTube, share. We just want to grow this community because we love college football, and I hope you guys too. But for me, for Matt, for everyone here at OddsShopper, good luck. Enjoy the games. Can't believe I get to say that. And we'll talk to you next week.